Blah blah blah. Hey guys, it's Ernesto. Welcome back to another Monday critique. I hope you guys are having a fantastic Monday. I'm having a wonderful Monday. Today we have two fantastic images to critique by the same person. So after this intro, we'll get straight into it. If you guys want to submit your image to be critiqued, please join our Facebook group. It's called Fine Art Photography and Modeling. In that group, I created a specific thread where you could submit your images to be critiqued. All right, guys, welcome back. So we're gonna get straight into it. So these two images were submitted by this gentleman. Thank you very much, David, for submitting your image. So let's get straight into it. So the very first image that we have here is a black and white image that was submitted by David. Now, this is a superb image, so it's really difficult to critique this image. In fact, both of the images that he submitted was pretty awesome. So let's get into it. So this black and white image, the first thing had nothing to do with lighting, which is the first thing that we're gonna talk about. But it's just a quick observation. David, when he submitted this image, he did submit the metadata that's associated with this image, and I noticed that you shot this at 1/30th of a second, and I'm not really sure why you shot it at 1/30th of a second. I'm kind of curious about that because you were basically shooting this in a studio, so I'm guessing you could have used a faster shutter speed for this particular image. And when I look at it, the image is pretty sharp, so there's no motion blur issues with respect to the image. So I'm curious if you shot it because you wanted more ambient light in the image. So please put a comment down below and let me know why you shot this at 1/30th of a second. Not that there's anything particularly wrong with shooting it at 1/30th of a second. I'm just curious. All right, that said, let's get into the lighting. So from a lighting perspective, David, you did an awesome job with the lighting. David used one light in this image, and I believe it was a beauty dish that he used to capture this image. So the main light in this image was on camera right, and like I said, he only had one light in this image. Now a hair light would have assisted David with this image greatly by helping him to separate the subject from the background. But that being said, I still love the image the way it is. I still love the lighting the way it is. So great job with that lighting. I don't think I have anything else to say with respect to the lighting. I think you did a pretty awesome job with it. So with that, let's move on to the next section. All right, guys, now let's move on to the posing in this image. So from a posing perspective, overall, I think David did an awesome job with the posing. There's only two things that I would adjust in this image from a posing perspective, and here's what they are. All right, guys, so the very first thing that I noticed with respect to the pose in this image was her hands. So here's what I would have done with respect to her hands to draw less attention to it. The thing I would have done with her hands is, first of all, I would have asked the subject to basically bring one hand down just a little bit down on her face, right? And then the other hand, which is her left hand, could pretty much stay up where it is right now because that's not closest to the camera, okay? So I would have asked her right hand to come down a little bit. So now having her hands on two different planes, that would have helped draw less attention to the hands. Also, I would have asked her to basically just bend her wrist on her right hand just a little bit, and that would also help to make the hands look a little bit more elegant as opposed to flat the way it is right now. And that just draws too much attention. So those are the things I would have done with respect to her hands in this image to draw less attention to it. All right, guys, so the second thing that I noticed in this image with respect to the pose is that the subject appeared to be leaning backwards. Now, what I would have done in this image, I would have had the subject correct her posture. I would have had her stood up straight so that this image would appear a little bit more powerful as opposed to how it is right now. It just seems like the subject is afraid of something by she leaning backwards. It doesn't engage the viewers when the subject is leaning backwards as opposed to standing up straight and basically projecting a little bit more power. So overall, those are the only two things that I noticed in this image. And I think if you adjusted those two things, it would have just helped the image a little bit better. But I think overall, I think you did an awesome job with the pose. All right, guys, so now moving on to the composition in this image. So from a compositional perspective, overall, I think you did a great job with the composition. Now, there's only one item that I would have corrected in this image from a compositional perspective, and that was to just include a little bit more of the headpiece. But other than that, I don't think there's anything else wrong with this image. Cutting off of the elbows, I think it's totally fine with respect to what you're trying to do here in this image, because I think what you're trying to do is draw attention to that headpiece, which I think is totally fine. So from that perspective, I think your composition for this image, like I said, is just totally fine. So with that said, I'll move on to the next section. All right, guys, so now moving on to the post-production in this image. So from a post-production perspective, man, you knocked it out of the park with your post-production. So you really kill that dodging and burning. So great job with that. The only thing I would say is just go a little bit easy with your cloning tool. Like if you zoom into this image a little bit, you could just see some of the evidence of the clone stamp tool or the healing brush, whatever it is that you use. You could just see a little bit of evidence of that if you zoom into this image. Now, not a whole lot of people will zoom into your image. The only people that probably zoom into your image is probably people like me or other photographers. So, but you know what? Like I said, you did a pretty awesome job with the post-production. Kudos to you. All right, guys, so now let's move on to image number 2. So this image was submitted by David, same guy. So thank you very much, David, for submitting yet your second image. So now let's talk about it. So let's talk about the light in this image. So from a lighting perspective, David used 2 light sources and a reflector. So one light source was directly in front of the subject, slightly towards the right, and another light source was behind the subject to give a hair light to add a little bit of separation between the subject and the background. He also used a reflector that was directly under the subject, in front of the subject, just to offer a little bit of fill under the subject's chin. So that's pretty much the lighting setup that he used in this image. So now let's dive into it a little bit more from a lighting perspective. So from a lighting perspective, overall, I think you did an awesome job with this light for this type of image. I think it's great. There's only a couple of things that I would adjust with respect to the lighting, and here they are. The first thing that I would adjust is the light that's directly to camera left, which is supposed to be our hair light. That light is just a little bit too hot on her temple. So what I would have done is basically reduce the power on that light, or basically adjust the angle just a little bit so it doesn't hit her temple and it will hit more of her hair, and that would help with this image. Another thing that you could have done is in post-production, you could have basically dropped the exposure just a little bit in post-production so that it's not so pronounced on the subject's temple. So those are the 2 things that I would have done to help adjust that light that's a little bit too hot on the subject's temple. All right, so the second thing that I noticed with respect to this subject is the hot spot on her forehead. Now, I struggle with this a lot, and I'm sure other photographers struggle with it a lot. So here's what I do with trying to eliminate that hot spot on the subject's forehead. So imagine, if you would, I'm sorry, but you know, this is pretty crude. I don't have a physical example to show, but I'm gonna try to illustrate it with my hands, okay? So let's imagine this is our light source, okay? This is the center of that light source, okay? And this is our subject. So if this is the center of our light source and this is our subject, what I try to do, especially if it's like a beauty portrait that it's, you know, is close up, what I try to do with the light source, as opposed to having the light source directly in front of the subject like this and the center of the light pointing to the subject, what I try to do is have that light feather just a little bit. So I turn it away just a little bit so the center of the light is not hitting the subject. So when I do that, that helps just reduce that hot spot on the subject's forehead a little bit. It doesn't eliminate it completely, to be honest. It just reduces it just a little bit, which is good enough for me, because when I take it into post, I can help reduce that hot spot even more on the subject's forehead. So that's what I try to do to help reduce the hot spot. And I think if you do that with your images, that would also help you with reducing that hot spot. So those are the two things that I noticed with respect to the light in this image. But overall, I think your lighting setup is very, very good. All right, guys, so now moving on to the posing in this image. So, well, we have a head. So we can't really pose a head much, okay? So there's not much to talk about with respect to the posing here. However, there is one item that I would like to address. And this is something that if you wanted to do, you could have done, okay? Now, I struggle with this, and I basically try to eliminate it as much as possible when I can, when it makes sense, okay? So the one thing that I noticed in this image, and I think could have been fixed with a pose, is the wrinkle that's right here between the subject's neck and her shoulder. So the way I would have corrected that issue was simply to ask the subject to drop her shoulder, and that would have just eliminated that wrinkle from there. And that's the only thing that I would have done with respect to this image. I don't think there's much else you could do with respect to the pose. You could probably work on the expression a little bit more, but there's nothing else to be talked about with respect to the pose, so we'll move on. All right, guys, moving on to the composition in this image. So from a compositional perspective, we're dealing with a head. So there's not much composition that you can do here with respect to a head, okay? I mean, there's different crops that you could do with respect to the composition, but at the end of the day, we are dealing with a head. Okay, so since you're dealing with such a close portrait, the one thing that I try to do is, if the focus is going to be on the subject's face, I try to eliminate any other distractions, such as the background. So if I'm going to be zooming in on the subject's face that closely and my attention is on the subject's face and a little bit of the hair, I would eliminate the background. That's just a personal choice, okay? Not that there's anything that's wrong with the fact that you included the background in your image, is that in this particular setup, that's what I would have done. I would have tried to eliminate the background as much as possible in the image, so that when people are looking at it, they will focus in on the subject. The other thing that I would try to do is include a little bit of the subject's hair that's cut off at the top of the image. I would have tried to include a little bit more of that. And those are the only two things that I would have done from a compositional perspective in this image. But overall, like I said, we're dealing with the head, so there's not much room there for, you know, different types of compositions. You could crop it different ways, but there's not much room there for different compositions. So from a personal choice, those are the two things that I would have done differently in this image. But overall, I think you did a great job, man. All right, guys, moving on to the post-production in this image. So from a post-production perspective, here's a couple of things I would have adjusted in this image from a post-production perspective. Now, sticking with the theme coming from the composition that we were just talking about, which is focusing on the subject's face. All right, so the first thing I would have done, if you look at the top left of this image, you will notice that there's a little gap there with her hair and the background. So the first thing I would have done is in post is basically take my clone stamp tool and clone in that area and cover it up with hair so that there's no background that you could see. So it doesn't distract the viewers from looking in that area to figure out if there was a problem, okay? So I would have just basically used my clone stamp tool to basically add a little bit of hair in that area. Also, if you look at the lower left of this image, that area of the image also have the same issue that we just talked about with respect to the hair. I would have filled in this area with the hair of the subject so that you don't see much of the background. All of these adjustments would just simply help the viewer focus in on the subject just a little bit more and not basically wander off anywhere else. The other thing that I would have done is camera right. Again, if you look at it, I would have tried to eliminate that background with her hair. And I think if you made those overall adjustments, the viewer, which is me in this particular case, would have focused in on the subject even more and not wander off anywhere else. So those would be the three things that I would have done from a post-production perspective to help focus the viewer's attention on this image. That being said, overall, man, your post-production is on point. Looking at both of your images and your skin work, yeah, it's definitely up there. I don't know what you use for post-production. Maybe you could drop that in the comments down below. That probably help out some folks. You know, I'm pretty sure you use Photoshop. I don't know if you use any plugins or whatever, but that will help out some people to help them get to your level, you know? But you did some awesome job with your post-production with this particular image. So that being said, we'll move on. All right, guys, so now let's get into the rating of these two images. Light. I gave this image a 5. Pose. I gave this image a 3. Composition. I gave this image a 4. Post-production. I gave this image a 5. Overall, this image received a rating of 4.25 out of 5. All right, guys, so now let's move on to image number 2. Light. I gave this image a 4. Pose. I gave this image a 4. Composition. I gave this image a 3. Post-production. I gave this image a 3. Overall, this image received a rating of 3.5 out of 5. All right, David. Thank you very much for submitting your two images. Thank you for making it so hard on me, because these were two fantastic images. They were great, man. They were awesome. So again, thank you for making it so hard on me. I hope the feedback that I had to give with respect to your images were helpful to you, and I hope it will be helpful to the viewers of this video. That is it. Thank you very much for watching this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with your friends and family. And please put some feedback down below and let me know what you think about this video. And guys, if you got this far in the video, you must be enjoying this content and you must be enjoying this channel. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next Monday.